Hi, y'all. I'm Thai, and despite my name, I'm Vietnamese. Born in America, and I wanted to study the diet trends in the Vietnamese community and their impact on Vietnamese Americans and their culture. So let's start with some basic demographic information. So here's some key facts I'll go over in a second in relation to some images. In the US, there are 2.3 million Vietnamese Americans, and 1.3 million of these are immigrants. They make up 0.96% of the US population and 9% of the Asian American population. They're most concentrated in California and Texas in major urban areas like Houston, Los Angeles, and San Jose. And many people settled into the lower parts of the US because of the hot, humid climate similar to Vietnam. And here's some immigration statistics over time. The Vietnamese diet consists of mainly these things, and we'll go over them one by one. Vietnamese immigrants and Vietnamese people in Vietnam use fish as their main protein source because due to the entire country being coastline, or tofu due to the prevalence of Buddhism and therefore vegetarianism. Like in most Asian countries, the primary source of carbs is rice and rice-based noodles or sheets, but Vietnamese baguettes are also often eaten. A common source of fats in addition to the meat eaten is coconut milk and coconut oil in desserts like these. There are a few shortcomings to this diet. Dishes are very high in sodium due to fish sauce and MSG. While the usual Vietnamese diet consists of an abundance of vegetables, many Vietnamese vegetables can be difficult to find if you're not near a large Asian supermarket. So the Vietnamese American diet lacks fiber. And the usual choice of carbs does not help this due to the lack of whole grains. The aforementioned coconut milk and oil are often used in desserts and are high in saturated fats, which exacerbate certain health issues. Lastly, due to the wide lactose intolerance, Vietnamese immigrants lack calcium in their diets. This is different for American-born Vietnamese Americans, who are usually raised drinking milk as a major source of calcium, though they still often end up developing lactose intolerance. Top cases of causes of death among Vietnamese Americans are cancer and cardiovascular disease, and they have the highest incidence of liver, lung, and cervical cancer among Asians, likely due to medical distrust, smoking, and a diet high in sugars, which leads to high rates of diabetes, which have doubled in the past 10 years, and the number of pre-diabetics have tripled in the past 10 years. Moving on from that dark topic, let's talk about what most people know about Vietnamese cuisine. Some of the most well-known Vietnamese foods are pho, bánh mì, and cà phê soda. Vietnamese food has a tendency to be very literally named, as bánh mì just means sandwich, and I better not catch anybody saying bánh mì sandwich now. And cà phê soda means iced coffee with milk. However, the biggest staple of Vietnamese foods is an incredible exception to this rule. Pho Nam, Nam meaning south, and referring to the popular form of the dish, being from the South Vietnam, is a noodle soup dish that primarily uses beef and can use other meats, usually chicken. The soup is full of flavors due to the long list of herbs and spices listed here and some extra herb toppings added on top. The noodles used are banh pho, which are thin rice noodles. There is no well-documented origin of pho, but historians agree that it was formed in part due to the French, the Chinese, and the Vietnamese. The French were instrumental in introducing beef to the Vietnamese diet because the French would eat water buffalo, which was usually used for farm work before, and butchers would sell less desirable parts of the animal to street vendors, who would use these parts to make soups. The Chinese helped give it its name due to their presence in northern Vietnam, where it was originally developed. And the progression is as follows. So it went from ngu ngục phăng to ngu phăng a to phăng a to phóng and then pho. Another popular theory is that it came from pho, meaning fire in French, and this is because they have a very similar dish, or not very similar, but it's a dish called pot au pho, which is a beef stew, but the dishes don't match very well other than that, so it's a weak theory. So all this brings down to a question I've had for a while. Why pho? I've had so much pho in my life that I've grown to dislike it in comparison to other noodle soups. And in this Google Trends graph, as you can see, where you can see that pho is like very clearly the most popular dish, and I've always wondered why. And while I couldn't find answers from any professionals, here's my take based on what I've studied today. Firstly, the variation of the dish is so popular because of immigration. The first group of Vietnamese immigrants were South Vietnamese, so their variation of the dish was most common. Secondly, it was familiar to the Euro-American palate. Going back to the popular food slide, you'll notice that The other two dishes are familiar faces, a sandwich and a cup of joe. While the herbs are a little out there, there's nothing offensive to some Western palates like seafood or spice, which is present in most other noodle soups that I mentioned earlier. Surprisingly, this wraps back around to the original reason it was invented. Europeans want beef, and the cuts of meat and bone used to make soup were not expensive when Vietnamese immigrants arrived in America trying to make money. Here is my works cited. Thank you for listening.